Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, I'm calling this episode Tennessee Reflections, Second Amendment Extremism is at the heart of American fascism. So, in the last 2.5 years or so, I've been devoting a fair amount of time, or let's say 3 years, to trying to characterize the different political actors in the United States in a way that is realistic and that is that gives one an understanding of where they stand and where we can go from here, and in terms of also their dynamics of different actors and how they interact with each other. So one of the players, the important players, is the GOP, the current GOP, who I have called neo-fascist, and but the word fascism has been rejected by some people as being foreign, or or some people who apply a too rigid framework from mid 20th century Europe, early and mid 20th century Europe, where there were parties with integrated, basically thugs in them. In Germany, the Nazis called them the Brown, or they were called the Brown Church, or the Sturmabteilung SA, and these were within the party apparatus, and it was part of this insurgent, radical right party that was interested in putsching, or in taking over power from what they saw were the corrupt Democrats, and also fighting against communists and communism, at least in their minds. Sometimes actually on the streets, there were the German Communist Party had some questionable ideas about how to realize socialism in Germany, and they also politically they made some mistakes from my end, but they were the fascists represented the sort of the radical right party that was trying to establish this new order that was very they had these theories about how Germany was being undermined from within and from without, and they were going to create this new Reich, this new empire that was a revival of past German greatness, and was purified in biological ways through basically what became to be mass murder, and exterminationism. But anyway, in the United States, we have some similar currents in the GOP. They act like fascists now. There's lots of fascists, learn something. In other words, Mussolini was the original fascist, and he was formerly a socialist before he became a fascist. He learned some about propaganda, the use of propaganda from the left, but it's definitely of the right. So it's a copy of some of the tactics of the left and even of communism, but used on the right. Fascism, though anyway. So what the events in Tennessee illustrate, though, is the American version of fascism. So how central gun rights are to, or gun extremism, and the fetish of guns and the cult of guns is to the American version. So and this is in part because the right operates here using a implied threat, or there are a couple of different places where the right uses the threat of violence. So in actually enacting violence in various forms, but also calling out to a fringe of people who own guns and who are armed and who represent uh, the terror that is needed, or the fighting force. Okay, but they're not really organized fighting force, but they are the terrorists that the right uses to intimidate its opponents. And so, very similar to what happened in Weimar Germany, we have a situation here in the United States where we have political forces that are vulnerable to this intimidation, and who have been put into a vulnerable situation and have not realized the desperation of their opponents, have not realized how much fascists are working on a kind of a nihilistic, or I've called this apocalyptic nihilism, that they see themselves in a life and death struggle, an existential struggle, where they can basically throw out any kind of lie, and they can use almost any kind of violence that they have available to them. Now, not any kind. They do it sometimes strategically and sometimes impulsively. But in the United States, we have a constitutional problem, because which allows this fascism to take hold, and that is the Second Amendment in particular. And so this is Second Amendment extremism because of the misreading of the Second Amendment. So this is not news to many people who look at the gun issue, gun control issue. But let me just quickly read for those who are not aware of the text of the Second Amendment. So the Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed, period. So this is an amendment that is distorted. So there's a distorted reading of this amendment by the gun fanatic movement, the gun fetishist movement. Okay, and they chop off the first part of the amendment, and they just read basically the last part: the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, and they make that right an individual right. So this reading of the Second Amendment as a right for individuals to bear arms, and we see states basically trying to enact this, and trying to, anyone can now, in Florida, for instance, without any a permit, carry a concealed weapon. They can also, there is open carry laws in various places. This is all about threat and intimidation. And the emphasis on this right and the focus of this core group of people, which is not a majority of the American people, or maybe 10, 15% of the population, which is still a large number, especially, so they're a large number, especially when you take into account the fact that our legacy laws, including the Constitution, have allowed a dispersal of now many, many weapons that are also far more powerful than the weapons of 50 years ago, of 100 years ago, and of 225 years ago when these amendments were, or when the Constitution was written. So the weapons that we have now allow for impulsive and instantaneous aggression and murderous aggression against other people, and that takes away all the rights, not just one right, but takes away all the rights of the people who are victimized by that impulsive use of these weapons. Okay, and we see this over and over again with mass shootings and with other kinds of shootings and highway, you know, road rage incidents and so forth and so on. The ability of a gun to enable the impulsive expression of murderous rage, or rage that then becomes murderous, okay, by simply the addition of the gun, okay, and the not only the addition of the gun, but the addition of the sense of entitlement to use that gun, okay. So anyway, in Tennessee, obviously, so the incident, or the attempted or the expulsion or attempted expulsion of legislators around this protest for gun rights, and basically was an expression, I think, in part of desperation by the GOP. They are cornered, okay, by reality, among other things. The reality is that their people, in other words, this was the shooting that initiated this protest was at a Christian school. Okay, so the people who were killed were probably the base, or the children of the base of the GOP. Okay, so it is the GOP legislators, the political leaders, are acting, you could say, irrationally, certainly, but also with a very, very strong commitment to gun manufacturers, or this 15% of the population which is so afraid of any possible gun control legislation, and they imagine that any gun control legislation will immediately deprive them of all their weapons and their security, and that they need all their weapons to be secure. And so, and this small fraction of the population that believes that not only do they need a gun, but they need a gun impulsively. They need to be able to impulsively buy a gun, impulsively, you know, and that no movement in the other direction, the direction toward some kind of control, means that there will be a gun seizure movement, or not movement, but a gun seizure policy by the government, that their guns will be seized, but everyone's guns will be seized. Okay. And I'm for gun buyback, and I'm for very strict regulation of gun ownership and gun safety. But I'm not against all guns, people, you know, personally. So let me establish that reality. I think hunters should have guns. You know, there's a subset of a very small subset of the population that lives in circumstances where it might be, or that have a professional need, you know, but they're not police, or they're not in law enforcement, but they may have a need for some kind of weapon or something, and that there's no reason why those people can't go through a background check and can't go through training, safety training, so forth and so on. But that small segment, though, is magnified by the gun fetish community. So anyway, so we have here a clash of views of society, and that there's a fantasy version of society that the gun fanatic community propounds, okay, and they try to enact laws. In some states, they're able to enact these laws like open carry and concealed carry without permit, where basically the idea is that it's a quick draw society, and a highly individualistic quick draw. Everybody is out or is in charge of their own security, and that they need to be armed in order to and need to even show their arms in order to intimidate other people. And this vision of society is opposed to and undermines the actual society. In other words, the fundamental trust that is needed for society to function in a regular way. And this now again, there's some small contexts where people do not trust each other, and they're far away. They live in a remote area, and there may be some marauding people there that they want to keep at bay. But those cases are magnified by the gun Second Amendment extremist community to be the case for everybody. So anyway, basically American fascism then is this sort of more disorganized but widely distributed armed population that is called into action in our context by calls to supposed tradition, supposed constitutionality, that also inflated and exaggerated talk of their opponents. So they called the protesters insurrectionists. So they basically, they're flipping around. They're projecting their own insurrection against democracy, the insurrection both on January 6, 2021, but also this putsch, essentially, or against democracy by the GOP. They're projecting that onto their opponents. They're justifying it, their own aggression, their own acts to oppress the people who are trying to change the current status quo, where people can get shot for no reason at all, okay, and by anybody or by random people, okay, and that is they prefer that state where that situation, that state of society, to one where there's security, where people are not afraid to go outside and to be among other people. And so it's a realization of a paranoid vision of the world. They use paranoid projection to justify their laws, their policy actions, and it's in diametric opposition to both the current reality of our society. In other words, and therefore it starts to undermine it. And it's because they're powerful people who governors and state legislatures and also some members of our Congress, they're powerful people who and powerful lobbies like the NRA, the gun manufacturer lobby, which is interested in profits, and that lobby wants that vision of society. They want the paranoid society, or the paranoid anti-society. It's not really a society anymore. It's a society in the process of disintegration. Okay, and anyway, that state of disintegration of society is the place where they can maximize their profits by selling more guns, by getting more people to be their own police, basically vigilantes, but B, also organizing this informal militia that also, by the way, has ties. So there's unfortunately interaction between, in irrational ways for the police, between the police and these gun-toting people in society. So there's a shared cultural nexus, okay, between a number of, not all police, not all people in law enforcement, but a worship of guns, a belief in force rather than law. So the use of force without considering law, and then force, and maybe then thereafter maybe making laws based on the use of force, and also against mostly black people and native people and people who come from other, or not come from other countries, but people who look like they're not, from Northern Europe originally in terms of their, their appearance, and they're part of, so the police, or not all the police, but there's unfortunate, even though it's against it's not in the interest of police to have their population be overly armed. In other words, they will get shot, and they have been getting shot, and also they are extremely afraid, and they don't do their jobs correctly because they're so afraid that they shoot. They either don't go in if there's an AR-15 like happened in Uvalde, or they don't go in soon enough, or that they overreact and shoot people because they are so frightened, and they so do not want to be wounded or killed by an armed civilian. So anyway, so the whole this creates chaos in the society. So anyway, so getting back to this sort of legal structure, that is, there's the contradiction in the Constitution, or certainly in the interpretation of the Constitution that has arisen in the last 40 years. But there's ambiguity in the words of the Constitution, that we really need a new gun rights amendment, okay, that delineates what are the rights of gun owners and what are their responsibilities, and then and which would supersede the Second Amendment. So the Second Amendment is it just needs to be superseded, okay, by a new amendment. You can't throw out an amendment, but you could supersede it, or I mean, I guess it could be revoked, I suppose, but that would be a more controversial. I guess you would have to put in the first part of this gun rights amendment that this makes the Second Amendment null and void, but here are your rights as gun owners, okay, or as So anyway, so there's a whole host of issues associated with this, but just to sort of underline the urgency of this from the point of view of, I'm not a lawyer, but that basically we have a society now where people's rights can be infringed. In other words, other people's rights can be infringed by people insisting on their gun rights and using guns, okay? In other words, all your rights can be taken away. Your life can be taken away by someone who, either in a way that they didn't, in a way that they mistakenly thought that you were attacking them, and they kill you, okay? And them having a gun makes that more likely, okay, and that could be a person, for instance, in your family, or your son or daughter, or your son or daughter could get a hold of your gun and kill you, for out of either malice or no malice, accident. Okay, and so all of this is part of the absurdity, okay, of maintaining this amendment as some kind of sacrosanct thing. But it requires us to look at the vision of society that the gun fanatic community has created or has propounds, and they're trying to realize, and that it needs to be simply be exposed as being an antisocial vision, a vision that's anti-democracy. We see in Tennessee, but also fundamentally antisocial. It creates a society that's not a society, that disintegrates. Okay, it maybe you could say but it's a society without a law that is that maintains rights for the most people. Okay, so a democracy certainly, and even a rights-based order or a rule-based order or a law-based order. It creates uncertainty with regard to the sovereignty and governability of the society. Okay, it creates a society that is no longer governable. And there's some people who think that the government is an imposition on their freedoms. That's not true. The government is the guarantor of their freedoms, including their freedom not to be killed by another person impulsively. Okay, and with little thought. Okay. So anyway, so I think will return to this in other episodes, but or other videos. But I wanted to just sort of open this discussion up here and try to point out that the fact that this particular dispute in Tennessee and the GOP's radicality is based in part, or it's key to that, a critical portion of that is this gun fetish and this gun extremism, or this Second Amendment extremism, this distortion of the Constitution, or the annulment of lots of the rights in other parts of the Constitution, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being annulled by the Second Amendment. So anyway, so I hope if you could share your thoughts in the comments, I would appreciate it, and or reactions or arguments, disagreements. And also please like the video if you liked it, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100 if you're interested in getting notification of further videos. Talk to you soon.